I start with my typical thank you very much. I'm really so glad to be here again. Also because I just said it, nothing has much changed. And sometimes I really like if there's not much that changes. So I'm really glad to just feel a bit of the old feelings and the very positive ones for being here. Yeah, I thought I'm very smart in picking this title because I thought I could put all my research in there and then give you an idea of what comes next. But when I then was preparing, I was like, why did I do that? Now I have to figure out what's next. So it's more about the past and challenges and then some ideas of future research. Now I will be able to click. Yes, perfect, thank you. So the content will be basically, I will give you some definitions, what is the unpaid care I'm looking at, and how I approach it in my research. Then I will go a bit into conceptual challenges, some about methodology, and the future pathways with a question mark. I have 2 slides about future pathways, but yeah, sometimes also great to not give you all my ideas away. But I also have to say with the future pathways, I'm very thankful that I'm not in this field alone. So also there I will highlight who is also having these ideas, or maybe someone also had these ideas before me and I'm jumping in on that and find it very important to highlight that. So you will know some names throughout the presentations, you will hear some more often that are more important to how I will shape as well. So a bit of the unpaid caregiving. So my definition is basically, I understand in my research unpaid care as the care for family and friends with health issues. So I normally exclude the regular child care. And this is also often known as informal care, family care. I'm saying now that I'm use all of these terms because now I have sometimes reviewers say don't use informal care, then I use unpaid care, and now a reviewer says I should not use both of them and should go to family care, which I normally don't do because in the Netherlands there's also a lot of neighbors that get help and care and also friends, so there's quite a higher percentage if you would compare it to the UK. And in the Netherlands there's like about 20% really not to family directly, so that's why I normally don't use the term. I don't have to explain, I think, the relevance of this all in this room, but just a very short recap. There is aging everywhere. It's a global phenomenon, and there will be the problem that there will be not enough care, both from paid care as well from unpaid care. So there will be unmet needs in the future. So there is relevance to do that better, the research that we're doing now. But also an example why it's a very broad definition I'm handling. So this is a very long survey question we ask in a Dutch questionnaire, but I want to highlight how diverse it basically can be. So here we say, okay, it's really about health issues. It can be also because of old age. It could be partner, family member, friend, a neighbor, an acquaintance, a colleague that really needs, because of their physical limitations or the mental limitations, they need help. And it can be really just going to the supermarket to really keeping company or medical and practical care. So it's really a lot of this. And it makes our research sometimes very complicated because sometimes you're really interested in one type of care, like to a partner, or you're more interested in really different kind of things you can do in this care. Like sometimes it's really about the medical and practical help, but sometimes it's also really important to understand the emotional, we know the loneliness studies in this room. So this is also a very important part. What is also interesting, also in this definition we put it, it's also sometimes very short periods, but it can be also a very long period. So if you see such a broad definition, that's basically the conceptual issue I'm seeing, because it is so diverse in a sense. And here you see the people I'm also thinking along with that are also interested in also these terms. We need definitions in every survey. It's a bit differently asked. Sometimes you know for how many hours someone cared, sometimes you know for whom the care was, but sometimes you don't have this information, and it's quite important to have this information. And what I also told you before is unpaid caregiving can be very diverse. There can be very different forms. So these are the upper ones are both colleagues from, I noted it down because oh no, I don't have my, I think it's the German Center for Gerontology in Berlin. And yes, those are also looking at employment consequences. And Ariane Bertuk is now at the University of Constance. And we were thinking about joining a network together, a German-based network. I'm then the person from the Netherlands, but I'm always will stay connected to the German academia also because, yeah, I'm now even living in Germany again, over the border, not exactly close to Berlin or anywhere, but yeah, so I will always stay connected. So with those people, we are thinking about that we need clearer definitions and terms. And the life course perspective was there, I think, from the beginning of my time on my PhD. It was even in the title. At the end, it didn't make it in the final title anymore, but it was really the perspective that I was looking into. And I think even in the first year of my PhD, I made these slides. I think I made them for the life course we are teaching, but just to show how diverse it is. It can be a very different kind of duration. It can be very short. When, for instance, your partner breaks their leg, then they might need help. It can be for longer, but it can be also lifelong. For instance, if you have a child with a disability, that can be really going on and really until the end, basically. And I always then also show employment. That's not only the focus today, but the employment is then partly intersecting there. It's also the timing when caregiving starts. It can be in early age, often it's in middle age, but not only. So especially if we have surveys that are only focusing on older age, we miss kind of all this young age care. And that, of course, then intersects also different with your career building phases or your retirement, and depending on that. And the last one is also the frequency. We know that some people, I think I can also already skip to the next slide, because that's research we did where we were looking at different kind of patterns that you can see. If you have like complete histories of caregiving, then you can see some patterns. So the original idea is from Canada, and we replicated that in the Netherlands. And we also see that there is special kind of trajectories. There is, for instance, the one-time partner care. So a long time you don't care, and then your partner gets sick, and then only you care for your partner. That's often men who care for their wives. But there's also some people that are really like serial care and lifelong care. That's often women that in early age started to care, then adapted their employment. And because they adapted their employment, are always the ones that get asked. So we also know that there's really patterns going on. But yeah, it's very important to take all these patterns into account because they, what I already now mentioned, are intersecting with gender, they're intersecting with work, they're intersecting with their own health, but it's something to really take into account. So that's one of the challenges, to really understand how caregiving to very different people and very different stages in your life has impact on others. But when I'm talking about impact on others or other things, then I also mean that it's quite difficult in a methodological sense, because there is a bit of an issue. It's the selection issue. And with selection issue, I don't mean that we are maybe not always able to sample correctly, but even if you sample correctly and you have a representative sample, then the issue is that there is a selection into those that take up the care. And so it's not a random selection into those caring and those not caring. So if you're like me, interested in all these outcomes of caregiving, it is quite challenging to figure out what is going on, because they are very different to compare with, caregivers and non-caregivers. I really love it that in all languages, it's another fruit. But apparently it's apples and oranges in English, that you shouldn't compare apples and oranges. Yeah. I don't recall what it's even in German anymore, but I love that. That this is yes. Apple and pears, true, yeah, which are more close actually. So that makes even more, yeah. So where was I now? So yeah, it's very different groups to compare with. So, but we want to know what the caregiving has effect, what kind of effects it has on someone's life. So we kind of have to take that into account if we want to do both qualitative and quantitative research. But I'm a very quantitative kind of person. So now it will be very quantitative, also my solutions. So some examples where you really like see, because the issue is really when both the selection into the caregiving also influences your outcomes. So for instance, if there is a person that has lower working hours, this person is more likely to start caregiving because we know you need time to care. So there's a selection of especially people, for instance, part-time that select themselves into caregiving. So if you're later interested in the wages of caregiver, you have to take into account that they had lower working hours and probably due to that also lower wages beforehand, and have a very different kind of trajectory in their wages to begin with. So you have really to account also for the lower working hours and wages before the caregiving even started. Another example is occupations, that certain occupations have more flexibility. And then if you have an occupation that is quite flexible, you're then the one that always gets called like, okay, there's a medical appointment, could you be the person to drive that person to the medical appointment? So also here the selection is that the occupation makes you more likely to be a caregiver or not. That can also be the case. So if you're again interested in the wages, then we also know that the flexibility or the occupations that are more flexible often are the ones that are also less paid. So there again, you have to kind of also account for the occupation. There's also an example on health, that will also come back later. Because if you have parents that have, for instance, dementia, you need to have someone to care for to select into caregiving. Then you're more likely to select into caregiving if your parents have dementia. But if you're also interested in their caregiver's cognitive abilities, you have to take into account that there is some genetic overlap in dementia. So you have to take into account that this person might have the same predispositions. So that is also a selection that is maybe not that social, but also something you have to take into account, or you don't have to take into account. But if you really want to know if the caregiving is decreasing your cognitive abilities or increasing, you will see later, then you really have to also take it into account. So how do I do that normally? The one first step is, of course, you have to know what is going on. What is the selection process going on? Because only the things you know you can later account for. And so here the example is the informal care model by Bruce van Koenau and Alice Boer. And they made a very nice model that can help you if you're interested in unpaid caregiving, can help you to really understand who are the ones selecting into caregiving. And in this case, it's really like you are in the context that's important, but what I'm always most interested in is also the disposition of the caregiver in more detail. And they have these 3 questions. Do I want to? It's more about affections. Do I really want to be a caregiver? Do I like the person I'm caring for? Then there's do I have to? That's about normative beliefs. And there I'm now doing really nice research with Marlo Ramakers. She's at the CRA University in Amsterdam, and she made a really nice survey experiment about what if your neighbor has a broken leg, under which circumstances would you help? And then you have different scenarios. And we could match that to our caregiving data. So we are also in this study taking into account your experience from the past. So if you have cared before, but what comes out, and which is very clear, that reciprocity is really the driving factor. We know that already from children and parents, that you really feel that you have to, because they took care of me when I was a child, and now I have to feel the obligation to do that later on. And we see that this even works with neighbors, that if you have the feeling that this person would help you in the future, or you know this person helped you before, you're more likely to help this person in the future. And Can I is also really about perceived barriers to provide care, Here it's about distance. For instance, the one, if you have siblings, the one living closer to your parents might be the one taking care. The one time we had discussed already that if you work part-time, you're more likely to be the one taking care. So it's really important to understand the selection process, and models like this can help to do that. There are probably many other ways, but it's really about also the thinking process that's behind. We also tested this with the pandemic, because we thought it's basically looking into the future, where you know kind of, okay, there's less formal care, there's less time, or time in a sense of also more barriers. So we checked all these different kinds of characteristics, and we saw all of them are really working out if you have this phenomena of the pandemic as an example to test this model. But sometimes it's really not that easy to measure everything, we know that. But also here there are some things like I highlight attitude, normatives, belief, competence. Yeah, that's very difficult to measure, so that's very difficult. So I have some tricks how to avoid it. The first one, the first one, I kind of want to go to the one that I like the most, but it's still not coming. But I give you one case where I couldn't do my most favorite method, but I came up with something else. So what we did in March 2020, which was also the basis for most of my PhD chapters, was that we were able to ask the complete sample of a representative sample in the Netherlands if they ever cared for someone in their life. Yes, I do still do so. Yes, I did in the past, and no, I never did this. And then the ones that said yes, we could give a very long questionnaire where we also were able to ask, like, starting at endpoints, and for some even more information. That's also how we made these nice graphs that we saw before with trajectories. For that, you really need to know the beginning and the end of all these episodes in a person's life. But my PhD was actually about employment outcomes, which were not that many in the survey itself. So I was like, okay, I have some information in current wages, but I also want to take into account the life course. But how do I do that? I want to compare to non-caregivers, but on the non-caregivers, I only have like the classical information, but of course nothing on the caregiving because they never cared. So what did I do? And I came up with the idea then of matching. And you see it's published in Advanced Life Course Research if you want to read up on that. But my solution was to match very similar caregivers to non-caregivers on split by sex, the same sex, similar educational level, just having a partner, children living in a household in same age. So where you would say they normally would have the same kind of wages going on. And then what I did, I matched them, and then I calculated the wage difference and used the wage difference as an outcome variable. So I explained the wage difference or wage penalty, because in most cases it was a penalty for caregiving. And then I could really also relate it to the life course factors that we saw before, the duration of caregiving, from how many people did they care before, and also what the timing, when was the first time they cared. And so it was really nice way of one solution is always matching, but in this case I also had the advantage that I could also include all these life course factors into my analysis as well. If you want to read the paper short, if the more people you care for, the bigger is the penalty. I think that's the most takeaway that I can give you from this paper. You can also only look at caregivers themselves, and that helps you to ignore the whole process of selection into caregiving. Of course, that's done very different kind of questions. Here I looked at different strategies of that caregivers can choose to adapt their work. So I looked under which circumstances someone would reduce their working hours, under which circumstance someone would choose to stop working completely, under which circumstance someone changes their jobs or becomes self-employed, because those strategies are not looked much in the literature so far. And we know from childcare that those are also relevant. But I can already tell you that not a lot of unpaid caregivers change their jobs or become self-employed because of unpaid caregiving. It's about the typical strategies of reducing working hours and stopping to work. So it is a solution, but maybe not for the questions you're interested in. But now I really come. That's what I'm normally doing. I'm normally calculating fixed effects. That's my panel regressions. That's my go-to strategy. What do you do when you do that? So you need panel data, so you need information over years, and you really look at how changes in your variable, in changes in this case of caregiving, so starting to care or even starting to intensively care, how that relates to the outcome of interest. So how do you do that? That's called demeaning. So you kind of demean, you take the mean over all years of a person, and each of the observations gets subtracted by the mean. You don't have to really go into that. We don't have to go into that in depth, but what I want to give you away, that is a solution where you can account for all the stable characteristics of a person. And then if you think back to the model, there were quite some stable characteristics in there that you want to have accounted for. Like the normative beliefs we know are formed very much during the first years of your life and then don't change that much anymore. But maybe they change because of caregiving. That's a question to still be answered. And what you also do, you don't compare caregivers to non-caregivers, but you compare caregivers to their previous self. So before they started, so you can really see how the caregiving may have changed. So that is a solution I'm using quite frequently. Oh, how am I time-wise?
25 past 1.
25? What?
25.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Because I have 3 examples of that. The first one I did in a building there, there, with these beautiful people that sit here in the front, with Jane and Maria, and there we were interested in to what extent is unpaid caring related to changes in job satisfaction, and we were also interested here in the caregiving intensity and duration. And here you see already that you need quite high quality panel data to do this kind of analysis, and understanding society, because I never can pronounce this. That's why I'm always saying understanding society. It's really a good example of high quality data that you can use for these kind of analyses, where you have information both on employment outcomes as well as the caregiving. It is now awaiting recommendation, so we will see what will happen with that, but hopefully you can see it out soon. To not wait that long, takeaway is that especially if you start non-intensive care, it lowers your job satisfaction. Then the job satisfaction goes up again when you intensively care. So there might be something positive going on there, that the longer you care, you might be really, no, not the longer in the sense, but the more intensive you care, there might be some going back to the normal standard again. But with caregiving duration, we see the longer you care, the less happy you are with your job. So you really reduce your job satisfaction. And the second example I'm having here is working hours employment status. That was with very good German labor market data, where they have a lot of caregiving questions as well. So I also recommend the German labor market and social security data. It's even better, I would say now, camera, but I will still say that I think it's better quality than a sub. The classical German data, and also here, really what you would expect is that, especially with high intensive caregiving, working hours are reduced. So here you see the working hours are on average lower if you're an intensive caregiver, and you are also way more likely to stop working completely. And the last one is a work in progress. I hope to next week meet Patrick in Oxford, or we have one day planned on really doing the analysis. So there we are interested in health and physical health, because yeah, of course, I love vicious cycles, and every presentation has to have one vicious cycle. So if we have more older people with health issues, but if caregiving also makes you worsen your health, then we have a circle of that is even more difficult than the lack of care that is to be expected. And there we look at two outcomes: cognitive functioning, as I told you before, which has to be controlled, the selection of the allostatic load. I think Patrick would be way better in explaining allostatic load, but I understand as the wear and tear of stress model. So they take blood, and in the blood they can see how stressed you are. That's my very bold way of saying that. And we use the English longitudinal study of aging for that, because they really have this information on blood sample as well as really good memory tests on cognitive functioning. So also here, really good high quality data that can be used. Some preliminary results, but we also want to change the analysis a bit. But what you can see, something positive, that all changes away from not having care before are associated with better cognitive functioning. Mental health, we looked if that's moderating, but that didn't make a difference. And with allostatic load, there we have less statistical power, because there you have the issue that, of course, they don't take the blood of the respondents every year, but every second, so it's a bit more blurry what's going on there. But you also see that starting intensive care is associated with lower allostatic load, so more stress. And I have also another solution, but there you need very detailed, very detailed information. And that's growth curve modeling. There it's really about how does something develop over time after and before the caregiving started. And it is also really then accounting for the starting position. So if I will give you my example, maybe then it's getting clearer. If we look at hourly wages, then it's about, of course, those that later may care are the ones that are later are already having lower wages. So I will go back before you do a sneak peek. So it is really about taking into account the different starting levels. That was the last paper of my dissertation. So it's also I have to do some changes for a journal. So maybe it's also in a good way to be out there soon. And we also differentiated between intensity and duration, and really wanted to see how unpaid caregiving has influenced wage development. And I had the opportunity and possibility to match the data that I told you before, where we really know the beginning and the end of each caregiving episode, to register data. So monthly data based on taxes. So we really know what wages people had at that moment. So it's really high quality data over 19 years. So that's really nice data. Do you see? So the gray one is women and the black one is men. But do you see if it's two lines? Yeah, good. We were also the discussion if we should zoom in, but they are different in significance, but showing you like this gives you the hint that the effects are not that big. But of course, we know with wages, so when you have some changes, they build up through the career, so it is something. But what you would see if you would zoom in, which I don't want to because I want to be open that there are really small effects. But if you would zoom in, you would see that those men that stopped caregiving, so when they stopped, they were able to increase their wages more as if they wouldn't have cared. So there is like, similar to the literature on childcare, there is like a care benefit effect, but only for men, like the daddy bonus, would you say in the childcare literature. And this daddy bonus, or this caregiving bonus in this sense, we also see for men that care intensively. So also there, really for intensive care, they can benefit, while women are really disadvantaged by intensive caregiving. There's no duration effect to be found. But I think that's the most catchy result of my dissertation. So anyway, it will come out because the dissertation will be published on that. So yeah, that's another strategy. So that was kind of the ways I handle the selection issue and also the different heterogeneity in caregiving. And now I want to highlight some future pathways. So what I wanted to highlight, and I think that becomes clear, is that longitudinal data is what you need to really take into account both the life course and also how diverse caregiving can be. So without longitudinal data, I think it can be very difficult. I mean, there are other options, but I would say that might be the gold standard and we have to support that. Yeah, but longitudinal data is of course very expensive. There's a lot of attrition, people are dropping out, and not every country has two very good longitudinal data sets that you can draw on. Like the UK, like the tools that I was showing you. So far it's really on some countries have a lot of really nice analyses, you know, from the US, from Canada, Germany, Netherlands, UK. So there is a lot of really good research coming out, sometimes also from Australia, but we only know about single cases. So we don't know about the broader spectrum. So also it's very Eurocentric. So it's global aging. It's not a Western or European issue. It's really a global issue. And as well, if we also want to take into account that maybe there's some migration because of caregiving going on, we really need this global perspective. So I think that there should be really one pathway. If I go it or you go it, someone should really look into how can we look from a global perspective. But of course, if you look at single country context studies, there you have the advantage that you of course have one policy context and one norm context. But it would be also nice to see how these different kind of contexts work differently, and then we can learn also way more about policy. But there's of course not that much country comparative data available. SHARE is one exception. The survey of aging retirement. Yeah, I think everyone in here knows, probably everyone online knows what SHARE is. But of course, there the disadvantage is it's 50 plus, so we missed the very early caregivers. And of course, if you are interested like me in employment, then sometimes the employment is already at the end and not at the beginning, where it might be more influential. So I would say the two future pathways are, first, we should solve the terminology issue because it's just also annoying, I think, for everyone to have to change their terms and have the same context with 3 different names in their publication list. Also, just to research, gets quite complicated. And it would be amazing if there's a big comparative longitudinal data set also globally. There is the global aging data from the Global Gateway to Aging. So they already tried to really get different kind of longitudinal data together. And this is already an amazing start. So this is something that should be explored way more. And then it would be, of course, great to also include policy. My supervisor also with Karen Glaser and a German and another Dutch scholar, they were already looking into what can you do, what is important to look at. And I think they were working on that like 4 or 5 years. And they came up with these 5 different policy measures that you could use to compare also globally. It's a caregiving support. If there's cash benefits for the caregiver, if there's cash benefits for the care user, and how many beds there are on in the long-term care, and also how many formal care or paid care workers are there that could take care as an alternative to family care. And by that I leave it, because as I said before, of course, I don't want to give you away all my ideas, but you also see these are quite challenging in itself. And you would probably need forever to have a really good longitudinal data set with all these policies included. So it's also an invitation for collaboration, because it takes time and money to do so. And but I'm really looking forward to your comments and questions.